that understanding of the customer journey is not only important for marketing, advertising, it's important for really even the products that you offer to your customers, how relevant they are. So it impacts everything you do as a marketer.
Your view of the customer or your any outcome or analysis that you do is based on what you put into the system, right? So it's garbage in, garbage out, as they say. So unless you have these accurate and reliable sources of information about the consumer, you anyway can't do a good job.
It's much easier to attribute for focused outcomes than it is for larger brand recall campaigns.
I don't know anyone who hasn't, because we all have cognitive biases and we look at the world and data the way we want to. So we interpret information, whether it's data, religion, whatever you want to call it. We interpret information that comes our way the way we want to see it.
I'm not talking about cognitive bias here. This is willing.
But I would not.
The lawyer's answer. Welcome to Madstax by ET Catalyse. Madstax has a focus on marketing tech, ad tech, and where we demystify the entire advertising technology ecosystem. Today, we're going to discuss channel efficacy, the measurement around it, and the metrics that are really, really important for us. And to discuss all of this, we have with us Shiladitya from CleverTap, Rahul from Altudo, and Durga from TY Digital. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us at the ET Catalyse special. If I can start on the very importance of measuring channel efficacy. Why is it important? Rahul, if I could start with you on that.
I think it's a very good question. I think starting with why is important. I think what we've seen is there's been a proliferation of channels and devices. Our data availability has become more real time. And also, I think as the focus on digital is set in, there's I guess competitiveness is set in. So with all of that, there's a need to really improve how you measure, plan, and execute your marketing programs using various channels.
But Shiladitya, if I could, ask you on the attribution part of it. So you measure and then you make it accountable by attributing it to the right sources. Right. How important is attribution? And if I could also understand, has it changed over the last few years?
Attribution is essentially finding out which channel actually is working for you, right? And the whole sector of sort of attribution technology has changed as all of these platforms have evolved. So now you have so many reasons why, let's say, your product works or your brand gets chosen or your conversion happens as you track the end of the marketing funnel. It could have been, there's so many sort of channels which you can't even measure so directly, right? I mean, people saw it used to be that whole previously it used to be an easy sort of formula saying that, okay, half the people on the road saw your hoarding. But now it's like, did I see something on Instagram? Did someone happen to tell me word of mouth? Did I, so many things. So attribution, all the more, I mean, I think you have to make it, front and center of your sort of planning piece of where you spend your marketing dollars, because that will, unless you know what works for your business, you're just going to be throwing money away. I mean, you're going to be throwing more money away without knowing what you did, more than usual.
Right. Let me get Durga in on the attribution part. Durga, in one of the recent reports, Google has also said that 56% of ad impressions are never seen by consumers. And there has been, of course, the earlier saying that, half the ads get wasted, but I don't know which half. I think David Ogilvy said it, if I remember correct. Now, so much of it is all around measurement and attribution. Spending on Google, Facebook, search, there is the first touch and there is a last touch. Much of the times, from what we know and hear, it's always attributed to the last touch. What happens to the first touch?
I think it's, when we made this transition, right, from mass media to now all of us thinking in terms of platforms and marketplaces, I think with the internet, you have so many different kinds of audiences in so many different sizes, and you have to correlate your growth strategy to your audiences, right? So if you're a startup, you want to get from 0 to 10x, you have much less of a core attribution approach than you do when you're trying to make a business model revenue focused, right? Where then you start mapping each user journey to a revenue outcome, right? And I think that's where your marketing stack starts maturing, right? And CleverTap comes in, a bunch of apps related measurements, open web related measurement, all of that comes in place, right? And then furthermore, I think even within our larger platforms, right, Deepak, like there are so many different experiences all of us are trying to offer as publishers, right? So tomorrow, what we might do for small audiences in Australia that are very valuable will be very different from what we do for languages, right? Where again, people are just learning how to use devices, actions within devices, maybe very voice focused. So I think the big thing about, you know, building a growth team or a growth marketing team within you know, any kind of brand is to be able to be very open and to have multiple ways of thinking, right? And to run small experiments and then double down on whatever insights you gather and then try and blow up those insights, right? So that's one from a pure marketer perspective, right? And a growth marketing person.
But when you're doing that, so if you're saying that if it's a startup which wants rocket engine growth, it doesn't matter to count the attribution. Just go hell for leather, spend as much as you can, create multiple touch points, then go about figuring your attribution. Is that what you're saying?
I think it, you know, so see, I mean, there's viewability and then there's core loyal actions, right? So viewability is literally saying, hey, tomorrow if Paytm wants to just educate the Indian public about something, right? Or let's say PhonePe wants to educate the Indian public about UPI, or for instance, Zomato just wanted to introduce a certain kind of program, or TOI wants to say, hey, we're available now in 14 languages. It's really, you know, a very broad digital marketing strategy that you assume. And in some cases you do print as well, right? Where you're simply trying to introduce a thought or a new behavior, and you come upon it in different channels. So in that kind of marketing plan, it's hard to attribute whether the first Google ad, the second print exposure, or the third Facebook retargeting led to more brand recall, right? Because it's more passive, as against running something where you say, please install this application, or please sign up for a certain subscription program, or please, in a way, you know, respond to within your app. Like for instance, CleverTap runs a bunch of in-app pop-ups, right? Which actually work pretty effectively in converting users to a subscription program within an app, right? So where you deploy what, it's much easier to attribute for focused outcomes than it is for larger brand recall campaigns, Deepak. That's the difference I was talking about.
There is a first touch and there is a last touch, and then there is something between. For a marketer, how important is it to know the between as well? Because it's that entire journey, right? You saw some maybe newspaper ad or a television ad, some thoughts happened, took a few days, and then, you know, you search for something, and then you landed on the particular site what you search for. The last touch attribution would, in this case, come to the Google search. There would be that first touch, which again, you're not privy to or you're blind to, and then there are multiple experiences at the store, some sensory experience at any other place that you had. How important is it to be aware or to at least plan for them?
I think it's very, very important. So I think as marketers have started to understand the importance of customer experience, that ultimately is the driver of revenue. So they realize that the decision-making is considered. It takes place over a period of time. It's rarely in just one point in time. So for marketers to understand the entire customer journey, from awareness, consideration, selection to loyalty, it really enables them to focus on which touch points they should actually focus on and weight them and attribute value to them, so that when they plan their marketing programs, they know, you know, what they need to do for awareness, consideration, selection, and loyalty. So that in between, you know, ultimately from first touch to last touch, as you move towards multi-touch attribution, you start to get a full picture of customer experience, of the customer journey. And that understanding of the customer journey is not only important for marketing, advertising, it's important for really even the products that you offer to your customers, how relevant they are. So it impacts everything you do as a marketer.
Is there a formula, is there a tried and tested formula in terms of allocation of budget for the middle, so to say? You know, is it a 10%, 20%, 30% of your overall plan?
Yes, it's a very, very important question that we get asked quite often, is like, how do you allocate budgets, right? And every customer is in a different segment. Their customers are different. And the types of products and services they offer are very, very different, right? So when you consider those nuances, everyone has different ways of looking at looking at, I think that's compounded by the fact that even the data that you get in is actually differs based on who you are. So, we represent SimilarWeb. The data and analytics that we offer, which is, for example, market intelligence across the internet. If you were to compare that with Google Analytics, just the methodologies are different. So you'll start to get different insights and some different variations. So there's no one size fits all that we see. It depends on the customer and then the data availability and essentially the products and services you offer.
Shiladitya, if I were to talk about industry-wide, is there a consensus on the kind of attribution models that should be used? Because there are many.
To tell you the truth, there's no consensus. I don't think so. There's a global sort of consensus at all, because like Rahul mentioned, it really does depend on the kind of business you're in. Fundamentally, it depends on that, right? If you're a digital business, like what Durga was describing, if you're a pure digital business, you really have to have a model chosen for the digital channels that you operate on, because that's where your users are. That's where your users are going to consume your service or your product. You have to know which of those digital channels work for you. It may not matter whether or not, you are, how your customer experience or what your brand experience is outside of those digital channels. So for you, you'll have to choose a model, whether it's multi-touch is sort of the buzzword for a while now. And it's only that we are I think we are getting a little better at measuring multi-touch. That's the only thing that's happening. If for people who can measure enough of those multi-touches in their journey, they find it useful. Most people actually can't, and that's the reason why the last touch still is prevalent. Like even on the app space that, let's say, our product, as a SaaS platform operates in, like attribution to mobile apps, which channels, which in-app channels work, right? You can measure everything. You can measure everything as long as the user is in your life cycle. But what happens before that? No, I honestly don't think there's a consensus. And it really depends on the industry that you're in.
Durga, because there is no consensus, how do you measure that, what impact has it left on the reader? And this is important for you to track, and also for the advertiser to track on your platform, because it'll leave some impression, some impact, and maybe the sale, the purchase, or even the client visit directly did not happen from your side to the client side, but it would have left some impact. But eventually, it's the last touch which gets most attribution, like Shiladitya talked about. How does a publisher thereby figure out that, hey, the first touch or the middle touch where, your platform was, needs to have the right attribution? Is it because there is no consensus and there is not much of, agreement on that we're losing out on genuine attribution?
As a media publisher, I think the most popular sort of approach where we are seen to be effective is in this sort of a reach, relevance, frequency, right? The framework which is called RRF, where basically we are in a single exposure able to provide reach for the brand, right? We are able to serve relevant audience, and we are able to, over a period of time in a planned campaign, achieve a certain frequency of exposure. And that's a very well-established model. It's a model that has worked. And it's a model where I think, at least definitely from a Times Internet perspective, we've invested heavily in transparency in that model, right? Day in and day out, we're able to offer different packages to different brands, right? And that's why brands keep coming to Times Internet, because they're able to get those kinds of results. I think the other two, at least in my experience, frameworks that have worked, one is what I would call kind of acquisition, engagement and conversion framework, right? Where, when you look at, and which is very popular from an app perspective, where you have a large base, then you're doing things to engage with that base inside the app, and you're optimizing for the final conversion, right? So whether it is Economic Times having a base for conversion to ET Prime, Zomato having a base to convert to Zomato Pro, or Times of India having to TOI Plus. Now that's a framework that we all use, but that is within the platform, right? Where we know that we need to have signals and nudges and optimize that flow heavily to make sure we convert, right? The third one, I think more and more is becoming relevant to all of us, is from a churn perspective, right? Where we are all, I think, in the app ecosystem, even within our own open platform ecosystem, starting to focus on how do we use notifications, how do we use a push approach in a very effective way to make sure that churn doesn't happen from our at least most valuable user cohorts.
Rahul, a question for you. There's considerable data and calculations that are required to measure the efficacy of multi-touch attribution. I mean, multi-touch means it's a compounding of a problem in itself. But in this fast-paced decision making, we talked about it. The trade-off between agility and accuracy. How much of a trade-off is happening, and how much of it is even acceptable?
Yeah, I'll cite actually an example of a customer of mine where where we ran into this problem and we led to this analysis paralysis, and finally we got out of it. So a few years ago, we were working with the Fortune 100 financial services company in the United States, and we were running their credit card program, so credit card acquisition with their products. So for a little while, what we were doing was, we were just doing last touch attribution. We were running, Google ads, and then, we'd have to get to landing pages and drive conversion. And that was running well for a while. Then suddenly it stopped working. So we started to ask ourselves, is it a competitor product? Is it some other value proposition changes that led to lack of conversion? So we then actually started to take a more holistic view. We had to take a step back and to say that, well, we're looking at this model, last touch, we're spending all this money on Google ads, and we were getting results, now it stopped. And I think when we undertook that entire journey, we started to kind of start with awareness, and we started to really track where customers are coming from. Some things actually popped up. So it was interesting. We realized that there were campaigns running on the side in parallel where they had YouTube ads, and there was an aggregator who was presenting their product. So what would happen is people would look at the YouTube ad, they would look at the aggregator site, and then they would actually come and actually search for the product and actually come to the site of our client and actually make the purchase. So we realized that the customer journey was impacting the end. So we realized we had no choice. If we were just looking at things from last touch standpoint, we would actually be losing on the full context of the journey. So then we actually started to employ a bunch of tools and frameworks. We employed a CDP. We started to get a single view of the customer. Then we started to run analytics on it. And then we came to the outcome. But that process was quite long. It wasn't as if we were able to just switch it on and going. So what I'm trying to impress upon you is when you undertake such a journey, last touch is the easiest. First touch can require a little bit of work. But when it comes to multi-touch, the complexity in actually getting the data in one place, and then sort of passing it on, and then obviously normalizing it, removing any identity issues, and then actually providing it to some kind of a marketing tool to be able to run analysis, that can be pretty cumbersome. So that whole journey is just not about applying the formula or the algorithms. It's about that entire process of getting data, understanding where the data is coming from, and then running the algorithm.
The future of MarTech, so to say, and analytics, it has cross-channel analytics, user analytics. There's so much of number crunching and so much of number tracking is being done. To get a single view of the consumer, you got to triangulate data. But before that, you have to have the entire data stack. Yeah. You're technically peeping into the consumer. The consumer is the product. The social dilemma documentary recently talked about it. And then you have the privacy purist on the other hand. They're saying, don't even watch, don't look over my eye, don't come to me with your cookie. There's a third-party cookie purge also in the play. If you're not supposed to have that entire data of the consumer, then are we going back to the olden days of gut on marketing?
I want to reference something which Rahul just mentioned. This whole process of trying to get data together in the first place itself has been always such a monumental task. And of course, tools have improved over time, platforms have come over time to sort of put together, but ultimately it lies on the marketer or the growth manager or whoever is tasked with sort of putting this view together to actually assemble all the pieces and assemble the right pieces. So one of the things which I was thinking while Rahul and you were talking about this was that your view of the customer or your any outcome or analysis or that you do is based on what you put into the system, right? So it's garbage in, garbage out, as they say. So unless you have these accurate and reliable sources of information about the consumer, you anyway can't do a good job. I mean, you can keep plugging tools and platforms at it, but it'll produce whatever the data wants to say, or sometimes even what you want it to say. So with regulations coming in, right? You mentioned upon the fact that it's actually getting harder for people to give away data. Everyone's concerned about their footprint on the web. Everyone's concerned about their privacy. There's obviously legality around it. There's GDPR. There's a bunch of other international regulations. India will soon have one, is what I've been hearing for some time. And so it's only going to get harder to track, or rather collect data accurately from the sources we already know of. But what I do know is that marketers are also still one of the most creative kind of people out there. So I think we are getting more creative in terms of heuristically sort of inferring information. So while I can't track your cookie, I can track something else somewhere. I can track like the correlation of something having happened. So there are newer technologies, and let's not also forget that the world already has a lot of data amassed about you as a consumer, right? So what I was coming to is that instead of having data silos in each brand's offering, what we are seeing is that there is also there's a move towards trusting reliable public sources of information, right? There are people who are, there are data brokers nowadays. There are data, platforms you can go to where people have consented to provide only that specific information that they want to be out there. So we are moving towards that world. It's a better world, but I'm sure marketers will come up with a way to sort of still target you.
Digital has been used effectively for performance, but when it is used for building brands purely online, what are the metrics that you'd look at, and how do you go about attributing it?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. I think the metrics are somewhat different. And I think quite often it's, when we think about looking at metrics, and the metrics, you need a good mix of metrics. So you'll have your performance side metrics, leaving those aside. When you think about your brand building, right? So if you're a digital first brand, you're thinking about your brand building, and you're thinking about where your reach is and where your customers are, and how do you measure the engagement you have with them. So recently with another Fortune 100 CPG company, we were having this conversation around, well, actually the conversation started, do we need a website? We have a brand, we advertise somewhere, why do we need a website? We sell on Amazon. So, so the conversation then led to, well, how will you control the brand messaging? How will you control your value proposition, the experience you offer? And then if you're not tracking things like time spent on site, your engagement on social media, you can't like hand that off to Amazon and hope that they will, control your brand message effectively. So when it comes to your own brand, the set of KPI you have to start with, we typically ask our clients to start with a KPI program. So identify simple KPIs. You don't need to make it too complex, but simple KPIs around things like time spent on site, time spent on an asset, amount of engagement your content has on social media and so on. Start there and then control the message. Because if you don't control the message through your own assets, or your first sort of party assets, if you will, then it's very difficult to do it on marketplaces and other places.
On the privacy part, I asked Shiladitya also earlier, Rahul, coming back to you on this. If so much of privacy, comes into play, so much of norms and regulations comes into play, it will mean that you will be able to measure less and less. And if you're able to measure less and less, you have SimilarWeb, which does, if I could say, wholesale analytics, and you have CleverTap at the other, which is minute, laser sharp focused individual user analytics, right? Now, if there are regulations which either prohibit the single user or the multi-user, and then narrows down and brings everyone on the same room and says, this is the framework that you'll have to follow. This is the max that you can measure, be it, at the group level or at the individual level. What does it then do to the whole marketing and analytics industry?
Yeah, so things are changing, right? So we've been seeing this change from GDPR, CCPA. We've seen Apple recently, the impact they will have on sort of app advertising and so on. So the change has been coming. I think one could argue, while we're sitting here looking at our world, one could argue this is better for the customer. If it's better for the customer, and then if it's better for the customer, you can then think about where they engage with you, will probably get higher quality data at your touch points. So if you're able to measure, they're opting in, so they're telling you more. So the quality of data, I think, will improve over time, right? So when they opt in and the quality of data you get versus like if you were looking at, just general impressions versus engagement on your assets, they're opting in, going to give you better quality of data. And when you get the better quality of data, I think you can do a lot more with it. So on one hand, there's restrictions. On the other hand, the quality of data can improve. And we're seeing this with SimilarWeb as well. And then finally, I think there's been a marked improvement in the last few years in the data and sort of the technologies available. There's been a rise of these CDPs, customer data platforms that create single view of the customer. There's more predictive analytics available to predict, which customer is going to buy what, and recommender engines. So I think, it's just an evolution. It had to come. You cannot chase customers across the internet without their permission. So it was only a matter of time, but I think data quality is definitely an improvement. And then I think the engagement is improving, and then the tools that are available are improving. So a lot of brands, customers, the implications are they're taking control of their own data as well. So they're trying to build their own data platforms, whether it's publishers and with customers as well. And they're using that data to do better analysis.
What is the cost of misattribution?
So basically, misattribution is obviously expensive, especially when you see it at scale. So all of these things, we talk about how, data matters to us. We talk about how understanding customer behavior is critical and essential to, selling them the right product or sending the right message on the right channel. All the things that you do are only because ultimately you want to understand the customer better. You want to, be there with the right message, right time. So if you're not, the biggest risk obviously is you lose the customer. But a bigger risk now is also when you not just lose the customer, but you also, make your brand sort of deteriorate, right? And we've seen that, especially with the more public sort of marketing channels. So every time you send, let's say, a wrong message out on social media as a brand, or every time in fact, we've seen it even in app channels, like if you send the wrong push notification or the wrong message, think that this is the place, this is a channel where I can double down, spend more money, or work with the wrong influencer, so many things can go wrong. I think the risk is only higher because your brand is more visible.
Durga, if I can have the last word from you on this, the cost of misattribution and the benefits of accurate attribution.
No, I think, like Sheila said, I think mistakes are much less forgiving, right? I think your reputation goes for a toss. It's a PR debacle. I think more and more, Deepak, I'm seeing positions like, your customer evangelist positions, right? Within companies starting to get very, very prominent, where leaders, including CEOs, wear the user hat very, very sort of, in a fairly passionate way, right? Saying that the line between creepy and useful is fairly blurry, and we have to err on the side of being useful. I think within the app ecosystem, again, I think users are way more aware of the exchange of time, user journeys, and the data that you're giving. So their thresholds to being targeted, being given the right information, matched to discounts and coupons and the relevant user journeys is much higher than in the open web, right? So I think in the app ecosystem, it's a little bit more conscious than in the open web. So I think in the open web, we'll start seeing way more conversations around how we're going to deal with information, right? Because it's far less, it's much more, it's invisible, yeah. It's really a footprint that's being sort of mapped, right? And users are not cognizant, as against apps, right? Where I think we have a bit of a long leash. But there too, I think more and more, Deepak, if brands are not transparent about what they do, I think it's going to be a very, very tough journey for a brand. I think I would definitely say that one should be very upfront about what they collect, the way they communicate, and users are then actually forgive you, and they have a better relationship with you, right? And they actually trust you more. So those would be my last 2 cents on this.
Right. So honesty is the best policy. The age-old principle stays. I'll come to my last and final round. We've named it not differently than Karan Johar. It's called the rapid fire round. Quick questions and quicker, snappy answers from you. One word, at best a line. That's what I'd give it to you. My first question, and Rahul, it comes to you. What is your most trusted marketing KPI?
Time spent on site.
All right. Shiladitya?
Clicks.
Clicks, right? Okay. Durga?
I think time spent on app.
One sector which you think has figured out the absolutely right attribution model.
I think food commerce.
Food commerce, coming from your experience, good. Thank you. Rahul?
Travel.
Travel, okay. Have you had experience with that, or is that coming from your
We've
client?
had a lot of experience with travel. We work with a lot of travel companies. So they've, it's just the business shifted to travel, to digital so quickly. And for a long, long time, they've had to work out attribution models, and there are all these aggregators and on-site. So they've had to work on models. There's sophisticated technology available.
Right. That gave Shiladitya more time. Shiladitya, now.
Yeah. I have a contrarian answer. It's fintech.
Fintech, that sector.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can say a line about why, because, there's never been a time that the financial sector finally has digital data, and they had paper all this while everyone else had a digital footprint. Fintech, and especially India, I think has really sort of, like, every app has lending as a feature, as it's popularly known. And the reason is because fintech does have a lot of financial data about you and can attribute you pretty well.
The third and final question for you. With a hand on your heart, have you ever misattributed willingly to just make sure that the data says what you want to say?
I may have.
I
may have.
Okay.
Yes.
For
the lack of a better.
Don't tell me the job. Why? I mean, quick one line if that was.
Because nothing else made sense.
Okay. All right. Honest confession. Thank you.
Yes.
Durga?
With hand on my heart, I've, banged my head on the computer, not being able to figure out data. And I have to confess, I think, with hindsight, I've definitely read data the way I wanted to read it, right? And then thought that, hey, I shouldn't have read it that way. But yeah, process of journey, as they call it, Deepak.
I don't know anyone who hasn't, because we all have cognitive biases, and we look at the world and data the way we want to. So we interpret information, whether it's data, religion, whatever you want to call it. We interpret information that comes our way the way we want to see it.
I'm not talking about cognitive bias here. This is willing. Willing.
Well, I'd like to think I'm objective, but I think I would say my cognitive bias is why I may have looked at data differently, because that's the way I wanted to see it. But I would not.
That's the lawyer's answer.
Yeah, but I would not, look at data and put my clients in harm's way just because I want to show them something that I want them to see. That would be unethical on my part.
We definitely tell all your clients to watch this answer. Thank you so much. We thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Deepak. That was a great session. Have a great weekend. Bye now.
You all. Take care.